return nearly $180 million overpaid by the United States, even though the Obama administration gave the international body permission to spend the money. The new chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee has put UN funding and reform at the top of the committee's agenda for 2011.
The administration owes Congress a long overdue explanation of, one, who instructed the UN to keep and spend $100 million that were payable to the United States, two, when did they do it, and three, on what basis did they make that decision?
Under President Obama's leadership, the U.S. government says it's settled its debts with the UN, accrued under the Bush administration, which held up payments in exchange for reforms.
We continue to talk about the ways we can work together to strengthen this institution, to make it more efficient, more cost-effective, and to improve its performance.
Because the United States gets a lot more for its money than it may realize. The fact is that the UN is delivering services all over the world that the United States can't or doesn't want to have to provide alone.
Whether it's monitoring elections in Afghanistan and Iraq or sending peacekeepers to Darfur, the U.S. is not likely to turn its back on the UN, nor is the UN likely to turn its back on its largest contributor. In the end, Republicans lost their attempt to get $180 million back. But the ongoing debate over UN funding signals an end to the UN's honeymoon with Washington. Officials here are bracing for more attacks for as long as Republicans hold on to the majority in the House of Representatives. Kristen Salumi, Al Jazeera, the United Nations.
Just over a month after she was shot in the head, and U.S. Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords is beginning to regain her speech. Doctors say Giffords is now speaking, quote, more and more. The Arizona Congresswoman was alert on Monday morning, even requesting a change to her breakfast. Giffords is recovering at a rehabilitation center after being shot during a mass killing in Tucson in January. The top U.S. banker says current job growth isn't good enough for a sustained recovery. Ben Bernanke's warning comes as President Obama prepares to send the 2012 budget to Congress next week. The Obama administration is facing increasing pressure from the Republicans to rein in government spending, and they've released a list of more than 60 government programs they once slashed. John Terrett reports.
In Washington, all the talk is about the 2012 budget and the battle now ramping up over cuts versus spending to boost economic growth. The Republican Party, which runs the House of Representatives, is laying out plans for deep cuts in social programs, from health and education to transport and law enforcement, affecting millions of Americans.
Clearly, our number one issue is getting the economy going again and getting people back to work. And we believe that in order for that to happen, that we need to cut spending. We need to stop unnecessary regulation that's hampering small businesses' ability to hire people.
President Obama must wrestle between cutbacks to appease the Republicans and efforts to boost the underperforming U.S. economy, which will entail some spending. On his budget radar, plans to help cash-strapped U.S. states that have borrowed billions from the federal government to cover soaring unemployment benefits by freezing their interest rate payments for 2 years. Republicans see this as a massive government spend. The president insists it's necessary to stimulate growth. On Wednesday, the head of the U.S. Central Bank, Ben Bernanke, told the now Republican-controlled House Budget Committee there may be signs of optimism, but a lack of jobs growth is still a big problem.
Until we see a sustained period of stronger job creation, we cannot consider the recovery to be truly established.
That lack of jobs growth is hurting the president's approval ratings. A new poll shows President Obama gets low marks from Americans for the way he's dealing with the economy. The Gallup survey shows only 37% approve, while a whopping 60% disapprove. Global economic woes have their roots in the U.S. housing market, and bailing out two giants of the industry, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, cost taxpayers billions of dollars. As the 2012 budget details begin to leak, it's clear the Obama administration is set on cutting them loose so that never again will the government have to step in as it did in the aftermath of the collapse in 2008-2009. The president may send his budget to the Congress next week, but as usual in the U.S. system, arguing over its finer points may take more than a year to play out. John Terrett, Al Jazeera, Washington.
And from New York, Mike Consal joins us now. He's an economist at the Roosevelt Institute, a public policy research organization. 60% disapproval on Obama's handling of the economy. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I think it is fair. I mean, the Obama team clearly did not expect unemployment to be as prolonged and as high as it is right now, and they haven't focused over the past year and a half on really getting job creation going after the initial stimulus was passed.
Right, but clearly from Obama's speeches and what we hear from the leaks on the budget next week, he does seem to have signed on to basically, a rather Republican view of the economy, trickle-down economics, perhaps cutting, electricity, help for poor people to have, to fund their electricity bills and so forth. Do you think this is a winning ticket now going forward?
Well, I think it's a bad ticket, and I also think it's bad policy. I mean, look, we're not hitting structural constraints in the economy. This isn't about a business confidence strike. It's about aggregate demand. It's about consumers being unemployed and not having enough money, having too large debts and the overdraft housing market. So I do think it actually looks really bad for the Obama team in the next year when it comes to jobs. Right,
but President Obama isn't politically naive. He knows job creation is key to his re-election chances, and he's decided to go with the U.S. Commerce Department and rather the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and Reaganomics as opposed to FDR and job creation stimulus. Surely, he can't be just doing this realizing that it's a failing ticket.
Well, I really do think he thought that we'd be out of the unemployment crisis by now. I mean, certainly his original economic projections predicted that. I mean, look, he also has to go to the Chamber of Commerce because he needs to raise, maybe $1 billion to run for election in 2012. So, I mean, he needs to establish contacts with the business community. However, I don't think that's an actual strategy for getting jobs.
But you see why it's so difficult to get one's head around it. You're suggesting there really is no job creation strategy in this administration at the moment.
Right. If you look at his State of the Union, he's talking about winning the future. He's looking at a plan to get job growth over 10, 20, 30 years. investment in R&D, investment in science, investment in education. There's only a minor amount towards infrastructure. And by this point, it doesn't look like it's going to get through the House. There is really deep worry among economists that we're going to have a real stagnating economy over the next decade.
Right. So what's he going to do? He knows he has to create jobs before the next election. I mean, how can he just carry on regardless?
Well, I think he's hoping that the rebound will come. I think he's hoping that, there's a fair amount of, this infrastructure bill might be able to get through, that with the unemployment benefits he got from the tax cuts deal from about a month and a half ago, that might kick in more. But, it's a real coin toss whether or not this is going to actually create sustained jobs growth.
Mike Consal, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll have more from the Americas in the program, including the U.S. man held over the killing of 2 Pakistanis and why his case has led to a diplomatic row between the 2 countries.
Also coming up, neighboring Gaza feels the knock-on effect of the uprising in Egypt as fuel supplies continue to dwindle. Stay with Al Jazeera.
Decoding the stories that shape our views.
Those images catapulted the story back into the headlines.
Everything that I thought would be easy was hard, and everything that I thought would be hard was easy.
From mainstream media to consumer-led advertising.
There are other options.
What's at the front line of global media?
This has been reported worldwide.
With a major media angle to it.
Comparing news and challenging views. The Listening Post, at this time on Al Jazeera.
Everyone in this city has heard about the release of the Palestine Papers. The debate is becoming extremely heated.
And you can see the amount of security that's been put into place. This is leading to a very tense situation on the streets.
They're saying that the fight can continue for as long as it takes until a radical solution in Tunisia.
There's so many caskets with victims, there's no time to do a proper burial.
And as one man told me, for him, 2011 no longer exists.
A recap of the top stories here on Al Jazeera now. And mass protests are continuing in Egypt for a 17th day. More workers are expected to go on strike, defying the government's order to go back to work. Meanwhile, the US is sending stronger messages to Mubarak, urging him to make the reforms Egyptians are calling for. On Wednesday, Russia's envoy to the Middle East met President Hosni Mubarak in Cairo. Alexander Sultanov said that Russia was, quote, with the Egyptian people and warned crisis could threaten stability in the entire region. Sultanov also urged Mubarak to meet the protesters' demands.
Egypt will successfully come out of this crisis by legitimate procedures through dialogue and agreement. This will be the only way to meet the demands set forth by the Egyptian people.
While the protests continue, the mourning of those who have died during Egypt's unrest has begun. Andrew Simmons reports from Cairo on one family's grief.
Hassan had much to offer the old Egypt, even more to the new one. His desk and books where he left them. A graduate laboratory technician, he taught English in his spare time. Now a martyr in this neighborhood. Mustafa El Sawi was 25 years old. And his brother Ehab, more determined now to spend days and nights in Tahrir Square, despite his injury from a baton round. In the daily throng of protesters, he carries deeper hatred of the regime that killed his unarmed brother.
Unlike the peace and calm right now, the scene was one of confrontation. Mustafa was at this precise spot. His friends say he lifted his right forefinger and uttered the Muslim testimony of faith. And it was at that point that automatic gunfire broke out, peppering his chest and his neck.
Mustafa died before he reached hospital, the finger still showing his faith in life and death. He was killed in the day of rage, Friday, January the 28th. A young man and woman the same age died alongside him. He had told his parents the day before he was going to take to the streets. They had warned him to be careful.
All those deaths won't be in vain. My son's death is just one drop in a sea of blood.
Mustafa decided to take part in the demonstrations to fight for freedom, justice and pride. The kind of pride that the Egyptian people had forgotten about.
He was a very well-mannered boy. He took care of me. He always looked after me and always made sure I took my medicine.
Ehab says he's proud of his brother. He's one face in a multitude of people with the same message. We won't leave. To Ehab, his mother and his father, the intelligent young man who was also a gifted singer, died for one cause only: the downfall of Mubarak.